È la terza volta, nessuno mi capisce.
La capisco io, signore.
Finalmente qualcuno di competente.
Meritava rispetto fin dall'inizio.
Parla perfettamente l'italiano. Che qualcuno chiami il mio autista!
Signore, posso aiutarla? Mi dica che cosa è successo.
Ho ricevuto una brutta notizia.
Non si preoccupi, gestirò Vando. Lei ha capito più delle mie parole. Tutti hanno bisogno di gentilezza.
The sound that silenced the most expensive restaurant in New York City wasn't a gunshot. It was a fork. Alessandro Volpi, the Italian billionaire known as the Wolf of Milan, had just dropped it onto his plate. The sharp clang of silver on porcelain cut through the polite murmur of l'Étoile. Every eye was on him. He was a man who commanded armies of lawyers and brokers, a man whose displeasure could tank a stock, but he was visibly shaking with a rage no one in the room could understand. He began speaking, a torrent of furious Italian, and his 5,000 an hour translator turned white. No one understood him, except one person. In the corner, the waitress, the one no one ever looked at, froze, because she understood every single word. The air in l'Étoile was not just cooled, it was curated. At $20,000 a plate for a private booking, the clientele expected an atmosphere as flawless as the diamonds on their wrists. Isabella Rossi, however, was breathing recycled air that smelled faintly of truffle oil and floor wax. She stood in the narrow corridor between the kitchen and the main dining room, pressing the small of her back against the cool marble, trying to will the ache out of her feet. She'd been working doubles for 6 straight weeks. Her uniform, a crisp black blouse and apron, felt like a straitjacket. She was $70,000 in student debt. Her mother's medical bills were a teetering stack on her nightstand, and her degree in Renaissance art history and linguistics was about as useful as a paperweight. Tonight, she was assigned to the overflow service for the main private salon, the Lion's Den. This meant she was essentially a ghost, a supplemental waitress, tasked only with refilling water and clearing crumbs, never speaking, never making eye contact. The table in the Lion's Den was occupied by 2 different species of predator. On one side sat Richard Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Global Acquisitions. He was American corporate royalty, all perfect teeth, a disarming smile, and eyes as cold and grey as a shark. His posture was relaxed, almost insolent, as he swirled a glass of Chateau Margaux. On the other side sat Alessandro Volpi. Volpi was different. He wasn't relaxed. He was a compressed spring. Dark hair, a severe brow, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was the sole inheritor of Volpi S.p.A., a Milanese conglomerate that had been in his family for 400 years. It wasn't just a company to him, it was a dynasty. Sterling wanted to buy it. Or, as the rumors in the Financial Times suggested, dismantle it. Isabella had been watching them for an hour. She didn't just serve, she observed. It was the one part of her old life, the academic analysis, that she could still practice. Sterling was a peacock. He used broad, friendly gestures, but his smiles never reached his eyes. He spoke slowly, loudly, as if Alessandro were a child. Alessandro was a wolf. He was still, watchful, and economical with his movements. He spoke little, listening to his assigned translator, a nervous young man named Marco, who sat slightly behind him. The tension was suffocating. Richard Sterling had just slid a leather-bound proposal across the table. "Look, Alex," Sterling said, leaning forward. The use of the nickname was a calculated insult. "I appreciate the history. I really do. My father collected 18th century Italian art. Beautiful stuff. But this is business. Your textile division is bleeding. Your manufacturing is antique. We're offering you a golden parachute. Take the money. Enjoy your life. Let us modernize." Alessandro Volpi stared at the proposal. He didn't touch it. He spoke in a low, accented English. "You call this modernizing. I call it butchery. You want to fire 10,000 workers, men whose grandfathers worked for my grandfather. That's progress, Alex, Sterling said with a dismissive wave. Isabella moved silently to the table, her silver pitcher poised. She refilled Alessandro's water glass. As she leaned in, she heard him murmur something to his translator in Italian. Dimmi di nuovo cosa ha detto sulla clausola 12b. Tell me again what he said about clause 12b. Marco, the translator, stammered. He said it is a standard protection, signore. Alessandro's eyes narrowed. He looked back at Sterling. Clause 12b. You say it is for protection. It reads to me like a poison pill, one that gives you control of the board before the sale is final. Richard Sterling chuckled. It was not a pleasant sound. Alex, you're getting lost in the weeds. That's why you have lawyers. Don't worry about the fine print. Look at the big number. He tapped the front page. 5 billion. Cash. That's when it happened. Alessandro Volpi looked at Sterling. He looked at the proposal. He looked at his own translator, who was visibly sweating. A deep, primal disgust rose in his features. He felt cornered. He felt misunderstood. He felt, more than anything, utterly alone in a room of barbarians. He picked up his heavy silver fork. He looked at the piece of foie gras on his plate, and he dropped it. Clang. The room went silent. Alessandro Volpi pushed his chair back, the legs screaming against the floor. He placed his hands on the table and leaned toward Richard Sterling, and the dam broke. He began to speak. It was not the careful, accented English he had been using. It was a torrent of rapid, furious, and devastatingly eloquent Milanese Italian. You think I am a fool? He roared, the words echoing off the crystal. You come here with your shiny shoes and your empty smile, waving your blood money in my face? You think my family's legacy is a carcass for you to pick clean? Marco, the translator, went pale. Signore, please. You are a vulture, Alessandro shouted, jabbing a finger at Sterling. A common thief in a $1,000 suit. You speak of progress when you mean destruction. You are not fit to polish the shoes of the men you plan to fire. Richard Sterling leaned back, a smug, confusing smirk on his face. He looked at Marco. I'm sorry, he said loudly, feigning confusion. I didn't catch that. Could you translate? Marco was trembling. He looked at Sterling, then at Volpi. He says, he is very passionate about his company, Mr. Sterling. Alessandro's head snapped toward Marco. Passionate! Passionate! He hissed in Italian. I told him he was a grave robber. I told him his father was a pig, and he is the piglet. Translate that, you coward. Marco looked like he was going to be sick. He stammered. He says, the offer is not sufficient. Sterling's smirk widened. He was enjoying this. He was enjoying watching the great Alessandro Volpi, the wolf of Milan, reduced to an animal rage, unable to even communicate his own fury. He was winning. Isabella stood frozen by the service station. Her heart was hammering. She had understood every syllable, not just the words, but the dialect, the nuance, the deep, aristocratic pain beneath the anger. She had heard men like Sterling before. She had heard men like Volpi before, too, in her childhood, in a life she had buried. Alessandro Volpi, defeated by his own translator's cowardice, finally slammed his fist on the table. Basta! This is finished! He threw his napkin down. We are done. He was turning to leave, his multi-billion-dollar legacy about to crumble because he couldn't find the words. And Isabella Rossi, the ghost, the supplemental waitress, took a step forward. Isabella's legs moved before her brain gave permission. Her manager, Claire, would fire her on the spot. She could be blacklisted. This was career suicide. But the injustice of the moment, the smug look on Sterling's face, the utter despair on Volpe's, the brutal, elegant Italian she hadn't heard spoken with such passion in years, it was all too much. She reached the table just as Alessandro was turning to signal for his security. "Signor Volpe," she said. The voice was quiet, but it was clear, and it was not American. It was pure. Alessandro stopped, his back still to her. He didn't turn. He likely thought she was a restaurant manager coming to apologize for the scene. Richard Sterling, however, looked at her with mild annoyance. "The check, please," he said, already dismissing her. Isabella ignored him. She kept her eyes on Alessandro Volpe. She took a breath and switched languages. "Signor Volpe," she said, and this time the voice was different. It was not the voice of a New York waitress. It was the voice of Florence. It was the pure, measured, academic Italian of Dante, the kind of accent one only heard in the oldest families or the highest faculties. It was, to his Milanese ear, like hearing a bell chime in a thunderstorm. "Forse il signore non capisce la differenza tra acquisizione e annientamento." Perhaps the gentleman misunderstands the difference between acquisition and annihilation. The world stopped. Alessandro Volpe turned around, slowly. His dark eyes, which had been blazing with fury, were now wide with utter, profound shock. He stared at her. He scanned her from head to toe, the cheap black shoes, the standard-issue apron, the name tag that read, "Bella," and then back to her eyes, which were level, intelligent, and fearless. Richard Sterling, who had been reveling in his victory, suddenly frowned. The smugness vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion. No, it was apprehension. Marco, the translator, looked like he had just seen a ghost. "What did you say?" Alessandro asked her, his voice a low rumble. He spoke in English, as if testing a theory. Isabella did not break eye contact. "I said, sir, that perhaps Mr. Sterling misunderstands the difference between an acquisition and an annihilation. I also understood your concerns regarding Clause 12b. You are correct. It is not a poison pill. It is a spring-loaded trap. It's designed to grant him proxy control of your board before he has paid a single dollar, using your own company's assets as leverage. He is, in effect, forcing you to pay for your own execution." She had not just translated. She had analyzed. Richard Sterling's face had gone from smug to guarded. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded, looking at the restaurant manager, Claire, who was now rushing over, her face a mask of horror. "Miss Rossi, what are you doing?" Claire hissed, grabbing Isabella's arm. "Get back to your station. I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling. Mr. Volpe. She is new." "Let her go," Alessandro commanded. The word was ice. Claire's hand dropped from Isabella's arm. Alessandro Volpe did not look at Sterling. He did not look at Claire. He looked only at Isabella. He was a drowning man who had just been thrown a lifeline. But he was also the Wolf of Milan. He was suspicious. He switched back to Italian, his voice sharp, testing her. "Ci sei tu? Per chi lavori? Who are you? Who do you work for?" Isabella replied in the same flawless Florentine dialect. "Mi chiamo Isabella. Lavoro per l'Étoile. E in questo momento, a quanto pare, lavoro per voi. My name is Isabella. I work for l'Étoile. And right now, it seems, I work for you." A ghost of a smile, so fast it was almost imaginary, touched Alessandro's lips. He had spent a month in New York, surrounded by yes-men, fools, and his enemy, and the only person who understood him was the water girl. He then did something that sealed the fate of everyone in the room. He pointed at his translator, Marco. You, he said in English. Get out. Marco flinched. Signore? Out! Fatene, you are fired! Marco scrambled to gather his things and fled the room. Alessandro then pointed at the empty chair. He looked at Isabella. Sit, he commanded. Sir, I can't. Sit. Isabella pulled out the chair and sat. She was still wearing her apron, crumbs on the sleeve. She was sitting at a table with two of the most powerful men in the world. Richard Sterling was no longer smiling. The game had just changed, and he didn't know the rules. Now, Alessandro said, a new cold power in his voice. He looked at Sterling, but he spoke to Isabella in Italian. Adesso, Isabella, digli esattamente quello che penso del suo numero grosso. Now, Isabella, tell him exactly what I think of his big number. Isabella took a breath, folded her hands on the table, and turned to Richard Sterling. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice as smooth and hard as marble. Mr. Volpe instructs me to tell you that he is not concerned with your big number. He is concerned with the fact that your proposal is not a negotiation. It is an act of corporate piracy. Sterling scoffed. Piracy? That's a strong word. This is just business. Isabella leaned forward, and the waitress was gone. In her place was a scholar, a strategist. Is it just business, Mr. Sterling, to deliberately misrepresent the leverage covenants? Mr. Volpe has just informed me that your entire offer is predicated on the assumption that his board is ignorant. He instructs me to tell you that he is not, and that you are a vulture and a grave robber, and that your father was a pig, and you are the piglet. Richard Sterling's face went white, then a deep, mottled red. The mask was off. The charming CEO was gone. You tell Volpe, Sterling snarled, that he can take his 400-year-old rust bucket and tell him yourself, Isabella said, cutting him off. Sterling blinked. What? And then Isabella delivered the first twist of the knife. She looked at Alessandro, then back at Sterling. I saw you, Mr. Sterling. When Mr. Volpe first lost his temper, before his translator even spoke, he called you a ladro, a thief. You flinched. You understood him all along. You've been letting him vent, letting him scream in a language you pretended not to know, hoping he would reveal his strategy in his anger. You've been playing him. The silence in the room was absolute. Sterling was exposed. Alessandro Volpe's eyes bored into Sterling. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had been played for a fool. Isabella stood up. The meeting, as Mr. Volpe stated, is over. Richard Sterling stood as well, his chair scraping loudly. He was furious. You have no idea what you've just done, you little... Oh, I think I do, Isabella said. Alessandro Volpe stood beside her. He adjusted his cuffs. He was calm. He was in control. He placed a hand on Isabella's elbow, a gesture of protection, of possession. Mr. Sterling, Alessandro said, his English suddenly clear and perfect, all trace of the heavy accent gone. This meeting is finished. My new advisor, and I will be in touch. Do not call us. We will call you. He turned, and with his hand still on her elbow, he guided Isabella Rossi out of the lion's den, leaving Richard Sterling alone in the ruins of his perfect, deceitful dinner. The moment they were in the plush, silent hallway, Claire, the manager, intercepted them. Her face was pale with professional terror. Mr. Volpe, I am humiliated. I am so sorry. Please, your meal is comped. Everything. I will be paying for my meal, Alessandro said, his voice clipped. He pulled out a black American Express card and handed it to her. I will also be paying for her. He gestured to Isabella. Sir? Her contract. Whatever it costs to terminate her employment with you, right now, I will pay it. double. Claire was stunned. "Sir, I wasn't asking," Alessandro said. He looked at Isabella. "Are you coming, or are you staying?" Isabella looked at Claire's terrified face. She thought of her overdue rent. She thought of the humiliation of the past 6 months. And then she looked at the billionaire who, just moments ago, had been as trapped as she was. She untied the apron. She dropped it on the floor. "I'm coming," she said. The ride in the elevator to the lobby was silent. Isabella was acutely aware of everything. The scent of his cologne, vetiver and old leather, the sound of his breathing, controlled, steady, and the sheer, intimidating presence of the man beside her. She was in a work blouse and black slacks, her feet screaming in her cheap shoes, and she was standing next to a man who had just, essentially, bought her. His security, 2 large men in dark suits, met them in the lobby. One opened the door to a waiting Maybach. "Get in," Alessandro said. She got in. The car was silent, gliding through the New York streets like a submarine. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "My office." They didn't speak again until they were in a glass-walled penthouse in the Volpe Tower overlooking Central Park. The office was vast, modern and sterile, except for one wall, which held a single massive painting, a Tintoretto. Isabella was drawn to it instinctively. "The origin of the Milky Way," she whispered. "A preparatory sketch. I thought this was lost." Alessandro, who had been pouring 2 glasses of water, stopped. "You know Tintoretto?" "He's Venetian, not Florentine. But yes," she said, her academic instincts taking over. "His use of colorito was revolutionary. This isn't the final piece, of course. That's in London. This is the oil sketch. It's more raw, more honest." She turned to face him. He was studying her, his expression unreadable. "You are not a waitress," he stated. "I was until about 20 minutes ago." "Stop playing games." His voice was hard again. "You understood my dialect. You identified a legal trap in a multi-billion-dollar contract. And you know Tintoretto. Who are you?" Isabella took the glass of water. Her hand was steady. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, familiar exhaustion. "My name is Isabella Rossi." Alessandro frowned. The name meant nothing to him. "And? And you are right. I am not a waitress. I was a doctoral candidate at Columbia. My specialization is Renaissance-era economic history and linguistics, specifically the banking practices of the 15th century Florentine families." Alessandro absorbed this. "Columbia, an expensive school. You left your doctorate to serve water." "I ran out of money." "Your family." Isabella's jaw tightened. Here it was. The shame, the story she never, ever told. "My family," she said, her voice brittle, "was the Rossi family." Alessandro's glass stopped halfway to his lips. "The Rossi of Florence, the Banca di Rossi. I thought they were gone," Isabella finished. "Bankrupt, disgraced? Yes, we are. All of the above." Alessandro Volpe knew the name. Every old money family in Europe knew the name. The Rossi family had been bankers to the Medici. They had been a financial power for centuries, until, about 15 years ago, they had suddenly and spectacularly collapsed. The patriarch, Count Antonio Rossi, had been accused of massive fraud and embezzlement. The family lost everything. "My father, Antonio Rossi, was framed," Isabella said, the words tasting like ash. "He was a good man. Too trusting. He made a deal with an American partner, an investment firm, Sterling Global." Alessandro's blood ran cold. "Sterling. Richard Sterling's father. William Sterling," Isabella said, her eyes flashing. "He used my father's bank as a shell to hide his own corporate raiding. He hollowed us out from the inside. By the time my father realized what was happening, the evidence all pointed to him. William Sterling set him up, bankrupted him, and walked away with our assets. My father died 2 years later. Heartbreak and shame. My mother and I, we were left with nothing but the name and the debt. She was pacing now, the story pouring out of her. I got a scholarship to Columbia. I was going to be an academic. I was going to restore our name, not with money, but with honor, with knowledge. But my mother got sick. The old insurance was gone. The bills, I had to drop out. I took the first job that would hire me, one where being invisible was a virtue. She stopped, breathing hard, humiliated by the confession. Alessandro was silent for a long time. He walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. "So when you saw Richard Sterling tonight," he said. "I saw his father," Isabella whispered. "I saw the man who smiled at my father, called him partner, and then signed the papers that put a gun to his head." Alessandro turned. His face was a mask of cold fury. "He did to your family what his son is trying to do to mine. Yes, this isn't just business for him, is it? It's a hunt. They are jackals. They enjoy the kill. They enjoy the destruction," Isabella corrected. "They like to break things that have lasted." Alessandro Volpi stared at her. The waitress, the scholar, the disgraced aristocrat, the only person in the world who understood his enemy. "You said Sterling flinched," Alessandro said, walking toward her. "You said he understood my Italian. You're sure?" "I am trained," Isabella said, "to analyze the linguistic tics of 15th century wool merchants. I know when a man is lying. He understood you. He was hiding his best weapon, his information. He wanted you to think he was an ignorant American, so you would show your hand." "And you," Alessandro said, "you hid your best weapon too, until tonight." He stood directly in front of her. "I am going to destroy Richard Sterling. I am not just going to win this negotiation. I am going to ruin him. I am going to expose him for the fraud he is, and his company, and his father's legacy." He paused, his eyes intense. "But I cannot do it alone. My lawyers are good. My team is good. But they don't know him. You do. You know the way they think. You know the Sterling method." "What are you offering me?" Isabella asked, her heart pounding. "I am offering you a job. Not as a translator. As my advisor. My strategist. I will pay off your mother's medical debt. I will pay off your student loans. I will give you a salary that is appropriate." He held out his hand. "Help me save the Volpi legacy, and in doing so, we will avenge the Rossi one." Isabella looked at his outstretched hand. It was a lifeline. No, it was a sword. "He won't see me coming," she said, her voice filled with a dangerous, newfound coldness. "To him I'm just the help." "Exactly," Alessandro said. "To him you are invisible, and that is why we are going to win." She took his hand. The handshake was firm, a contract sealed not in ink, but in shared history and a thirst for justice. "One condition," Isabella said. "Name it." "You never, ever," she said, "call me Bella again. My name is Isabella." A corner of Alessandro's mouth quirked. "Understood, Isabella. Now, let's get to work. Show me exactly what you know about Richard Sterling's spring-loaded trap." The next morning, Isabella Rossi was unrecognizable. Alessandro's personal assistant, a frighteningly efficient woman named Elena, had arrived at the penthouse suite, which Isabella was now occupying, at 5:02 a.m. A wardrobe had been procured. Gone was the black polyester. In its place were tailored Tom Ford pantsuits, silk blouses from Loro Piana, and leather-soled Todd's loafers. When Isabella walked into Alessandro's office at 7 a.m., holding an espresso, she looked less like a waitress and more like the CEO of a rival company. The only trace of her former life was the fierce, analytical exhaustion in her eyes. "Good," Alessandro said, not looking up from a stack of files. "Elena, get Ms. Rossi a full security pass. She is to have access to everything. Level 10, especially the Volpi archives." "Yes, Signor Volpi." For the next 72 hours, the penthouse office became a war room. The glass walls were covered in whiteboards, flow charts, and financial projections. They subsisted on coffee and adrenaline. They argued, they debated, and they dug. Isabella was relentless. She was not a lawyer, she was not an economist, but she was a scholar. She read the 400-page sterling proposal, not as a contract, but as a text. She was looking for patterns, for the author's voice. "He's sloppy," she said on the second night, staring at a clause. "Sloppy," Alessandro said, rubbing his temples. "He's about to steal my company. He doesn't seem sloppy." "No, he is sloppy," Isabella insisted, underlining a line in red marker. "Look, here, clause 12b, the one I spotted, the trap. It's almost identical to a clause in his takeover of a German pharmaceutical last year. But look at this one, clause 14a. It references a holding company, SG Cayman Holdings LLC. A shell company in the Cayman Islands," Alessandro said, unimpressed. "Standard. They all have them." "I know. But I also have my father's journals." Isabella pulled an old, leather-bound book from her briefcase. She had retrieved it from her tiny apartment when Elena had taken her to gather her essentials. The pages were filled with her father's elegant, desperate script. She flipped to a page near the end. When my father knew it was over, he tried to trace the money. He found the company William Sterling used to drain his bank. It was called W.S. Cayman Holdings. W.S. William Sterling, S.G., Sterling Global, Alessandro said, seeing it. "He's using his father's playbook." "He's not just using it," Isabella said, her eyes bright with a terrible discovery. "He's lazy. He's an arrogant fool who inherited a strategy he doesn't even understand. He's using the exact same mechanisms, the same language. He thinks no one is smart enough to see the pattern." Alessandro felt a surge of adrenaline that cut through his fatigue. "What does that mean for us?" "It means," Isabella said, "that we're not just looking at a hostile takeover." She went to a new whiteboard. "Why is he doing this? Why Volpi? Your company is old, but it's stable. The assets are real. The land, the factories, the patents. Sterling Global is all air. It's algorithms and acquisitions. They don't make anything. They just buy and sell. He wants our assets to strip," Alessandro said. "No," Isabella said, shaking her head. "That's what he wants you to think. That's the story for the press. But it's not about profit. It's about liquidity." She drew 2 columns. "Volpi and Sterling. Your debt-to-asset ratio is minimal," she said. "His, according to these reports, is catastrophic. He's over-leveraged. He's been promising his shareholders 30% returns, year after year. He can't do it anymore. The market is turning." Alessandro stared at the board. "He's not trying to buy me. He's trying to hide. He's trying to cover his losses." "He's not just covering losses," Isabella said, her voice dropping. "I think he's plugging a hole. I think Sterling Global is insolvent. I think Richard Sterling has been committing massive systemic fraud to hide it. He's not buying Volpi SPA to modernize it. He's buying it to feed it into his furnace, to use your clean, real assets to cover up his own company's black hole." This was the second, and much bigger twist. This wasn't a takeover. It was a drowning. "He's desperate," Alessandro realized. That's why he was so arrogant. It was a bluff. He needs this deal to close, fast, before his own quarterly reports come out. Which gives us the leverage, Isabella finished. A new dynamic had formed between them. The class barrier had evaporated. The employer-employee pretense was gone. They were two minds locked on a single target. He respected her intellect. She, for the first time, was seeing the man behind the wolf persona. She saw the crushing weight of his family's legacy, the loneliness of his position. He wasn't just a ruthless billionaire, he was a guardian, terrified of being the Volpe who lost it all. He thinks I'm a waitress, Isabella said, a slow, cold smile spreading across her face. He thinks I'm a little girl who speaks good Italian. He has no idea who I am. Then it's time we remind him, Alessandro said. He picked up the phone. Elena, get me Richard Sterling. The emergency board meeting was called at Sterling Global's headquarters. Alessandro had refused to meet at the restaurant. He refused to meet in his office. He had, at Isabella's suggestion, demanded to meet on Sterling's home turf. A snake is weakest when you corner it in its own nest, she had said. When Alessandro Volpe walked into the 50th floor boardroom, the atmosphere was electric. Richard Sterling was at the head of the table, flanked by his lawyers. Several of his key board members, looking confused and angry about the last-minute summons, were present. But the real shock was the person who walked in beside Alessandro. It was Isabella Rossi. She was not wearing an apron. She was wearing a razor-sharp charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a leather portfolio. She looked, in every way, like Alessandro's chief counsel. Sterling's eyes widened, and a flicker of disbelief and rage crossed his face. You, he spat. What is this, Volpe? You're bringing the help to a board meeting? Alessandro smiled, a thin, cold expression. Mr. Sterling, meet Ms. Isabella Rossi, my new senior advisor for European acquisitions. She has a unique perspective on your father's business practices. The color drained from Sterling's face. The board members looked at each other, confused. Rossi, one of them, an older man named Peterson, murmured. As in, Banca di Rossi? The very same, Isabella said, her voice calm and carrying across the room. She took a seat directly opposite Sterling. This is a joke, Sterling stammered. This is harassment. This, Alessandro said, is a renegotiation. He sat, placing his own file on the table. We have reviewed your offer, and we are declining. Sterling forced a laugh. Declining? Alex, you're in no position to decline. Your board is split. My offer is the only one on the table. Take it, or I go hostile, and I'll have your company in a week for half the price. You misunderstand, Alessandro said, leaning back. We are not declining because the price is wrong. We are declining because we are not in the business of associating with criminals. The room went dead silent. Sterling's lawyers immediately started protesting. Mr. Volpe, that is a slanderous accusation. Is it? Isabella spoke, her voice cutting through the noise. She opened her portfolio. Mr. Sterling, I have here a copy of your 2024 projections for your shareholders. And I have here a copy of your father's acquisition file for the Banca di Rossi in 2008. She looked at Sterling. It's the same signature move. You leverage an acquisition, then you move the debt into an offshore shell company. In this case, SG Cayman Holdings. That's standard procedure, Sterling snapped. It is, Isabella agreed. But what isn't standard procedure is using that shell company to buy back your own corporate bonds at an inflated price, effectively faking your own liquidity. Your father did it to hide his losses in the '08 crash, using my family's bank as the vehicle. And you, Mr. Sterling, are doing it right now. The only difference is you're not just insolvent. You're committing wire fraud. Sterling shot to his feet. This is insane! You have no proof. But we do, Alessandro said. You see, when you tried to trap me with Clause 12B, you gave us full access to your due diligence files. You were so arrogant, you assumed we would only look at the divisions you were buying. You didn't think we'd look at your whole company. Isabella slid a single piece of paper across the table to Peterson, the lead board member. That, Isabella said, is a wire transfer confirmation from S.G. Cayman Holdings. It shows a $300 million transfer to a company you personally own, Mr. Sterling. It's dated 3 days ago. You're not just trying to cover your company's losses. You're embezzling. You're stealing from your own shareholders. Peterson looked at the paper. He looked at Sterling. His face was grey. Sterling was trapped. He was cornered. He looked at his lawyers, who were speechless. He looked at his board, who were staring at him with dawning horror. And then he looked at Isabella. His mind snapped. The pressure, the exposure, the humiliation, it was all too much. He reverted to the one language he thought was a secret, a weapon. He glared at Isabella, his face purple with rage. Tu! He snarled, the Italian guttural. Ugly, maledetta, hai rovinato tutto. Eri solo una cameriera. You, cursed woman. You ruined everything. You were just a waitress. The board members, who only spoke English, looked on in confusion. But Alessandro Volpi understood, and he had been waiting for this. He smiled. So, he said, in perfect, clear English, you do speak Italian, Richard? Sterling froze. He realized what he had done. He had confessed. He had admitted his deception in front of his entire board. Isabella Rossi leaned forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I was a waitress, yes, she said, her voice a whisper of steel. But I was also a Rossi, and we have very long memories. The boardroom imploded. What did he say? Peterson, the board member, demanded, holding up the wire transfer. Richard, what is this? He's lying! She's lying! Sterling yelled, his composure shattered. It's a setup. They forged. We didn't forge anything, Richard, Alessandro said calmly. It's from your own data room, the one you gave us access to. You were just so busy playing the part of the ignorant American, you forgot to clean up your own files. Alessandro stood up. My advisor, Miss Rossi, has already forwarded the complete file to the SEC and to the Financial Times. Richard Sterling looked at the door. He was a trapped animal. His entire empire, built on his father's theft and his own arrogance, was dissolving in real time. You can't prove any of this, he whispered, but the defiance was gone. Oh, I think we can, Isabella said. She finally allowed herself a moment of cold, satisfying anger. You see, Mr. Sterling, your father was a thief, but he was a smart one. You're just a cheap copy. You used the same shell company names. You used the same accounting loopholes. You even used the same bank in the Caymans. It's like you wanted to be caught. She looked at the board. He needed Volpi SPA. He needed its real, tangible assets to hide his $300 million embezzlement. He was going to feed a 400-year-old company into a furnace just to cover his tracks for one more quarter. He wasn't acquiring a company. He was destroying evidence. Peterson threw the file on the table. Security, he said to his assistant. Call security and get our legal counsel in here. Now, Mr. Sterling, you are suspended as CEO, effective immediately. You can't! Sterling shrieked. This is my company! It was your father's company, Richard, Peterson said, his voice dripping with contempt. And you just ran it into the ground. 2 security guards entered the room. They moved towards Sterling, who, in a final pathetic act of defiance, pointed a trembling finger at Isabella. "You!" he seethed. "You were nothing. A ghost. I didn't even see you." "That was your mistake," Isabella replied, standing to her full height. "You never see the help. You step on people like my father. You dismiss people like me. You look at us, and you see nothing." She walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of him. "My name," she said, her voice clear and low, "is Isabella Rossi. My father was Antonio Rossi, and you will not forget our name again." As the security guards took his arms, Sterling's gaze met Alessandro's. The Wolf of Milan just stared back, his expression impassive, offering nothing. It was the ultimate victory, not a shout, but a silence. Alessandro and Isabella walked out of the boardroom, leaving the ruins of Sterling Global behind them. They didn't speak in the elevator. They didn't speak in the car. The silence was no longer tense. It was a shared, exhausted peace. When they were back in the penthouse, the sun was setting, painting the city in hues of orange and purple. "So," Alessandro said, undoing his tie, "it is done." "It is done," Isabella agreed. She felt empty. The revenge she had craved for 15 years had finally arrived, but it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like an ending. "My family's name is cleared," she said, more to herself than to him. "The news will vindicate my father." "It will," Alessandro confirmed. He walked over to his desk and pulled out a checkbook. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Our arrangement," he said. "Your mother's medical bills, your student loans, and your salary. I believe 1 week's work as a senior advisor is, let's say, $5 million. He started to write. Isabella put her hand on his, stopping him. "No," she said. He looked up, confused. "No, I don't want your money, Alessandro. This was our deal. I am a Volpe. We honor our deals." "I know," she said. "And I will accept the payment for the loans and the medical bills. That is a debt I cannot repay. But I will not take a $5 million salary for 1 week." "Then what do you want?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. Isabella looked at the Tintoretto on the wall, the raw, honest sketch. She thought of her wasted degree, her passion for history, for art, for legacy. "Your family," she said, "has the Volpe Foundation, for cultural heritage." "Yes," he said. "It has not been a priority for me. It was my mother's." "Make it a priority," Isabella said. "Give me a real job, not a payout. Let me run it. Let me use the Volpe resources to restore the art, the history, the very things men like Sterling try to tear down. Let me rebuild my family's name, not with money, but with work. Honest work." Alessandro stared at her. He had offered her a fortune, an ending. She had, instead, asked for a beginning. She had asked for a purpose. He slowly tore up the check. "The Foundation's offices are in Florence," he said. "I know," she replied. "It will require you to move there." A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. "I think I can handle that. It's time I went home." 6 months later, the world was a different place. The fall of Sterling Global was the biggest financial story of the decade. Richard Sterling was facing a 20-year prison sentence for fraud, embezzlement, and a litany of other charges. The trial had fully exonerated the name of Antonio Rossi, painting him as the first and most tragic victim of the Sterling's corporate greed. Isabella Rossi, however, was not on the cover of the Financial Times. She was, instead, covered in a fine layer of dust in a climate-controlled vault beneath the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. She was the new director of the Volpe Rossi Foundation for Cultural Heritage. Alessandro, in a move that stunned the art world, had not only given her full control of his family's massive foundation, but had formally partnered it with her, adding her family's name to the charter. It was a public, permanent restoration of her family's honor. Isabella had thrown herself into the work. She was in her element. She wasn't just managing funds, she was in the trenches. She was using her linguistic skills to negotiate the return of stolen art, her historical knowledge to identify lost masterpieces, and her newfound influence to fund the next generation of artists and restorers. She was happy. For the first time in her life, she was truly, deeply, and profoundly happy. She was wiping grime off a 16th century frame when her assistant cleared his throat. "Direttrice," he said, "Signor Volpi is here." Isabella's heart did a strange, unfamiliar flip. She stood up, brushing dust from her pants. "Thank you, Matteo." Alessandro Volpi walked into the restoration lab. He looked out of place in his perfect Brioni suit, a stark contrast to the beautiful, organized chaos of the workshop. He had changed, too. The Wolf of Milan was still there, but the permanent scowl was gone. He seemed lighter. With Sterling gone and his company secure, he had started to delegate. He had started to live. "Isabella," he said. His voice was warm. "Alessandro, you're early. The board meeting isn't until tomorrow." "I know," he said. "I wanted to see this." He gestured around the room. "What you've built." "What we're building," she corrected, smiling. "Come, I want to show you something." She led him to a small, damaged panel painting. It was a portrait of a Florentine noblewoman. "This," she said, "was on a list of art confiscated by William Sterling during my father's bankruptcy. He claimed it as collateral. It was in his private vault in Geneva. We got it back last week." "It's beautiful," Alessandro said. "It is," Isabella agreed, "but that's not the interesting part." She pointed to a small, faded crest in the corner of the painting. It was a shield with a wolf. Alessandro frowned. "The Volpi crest." "Yes," Isabella said, her eyes shining. "This painting was a wedding gift from your ancestor, Giovanni Volpi, to my ancestor, Maria Rossi, when they married in 1504. Our families were bound together, long before we ever met." Alessandro was speechless. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the ancient crest. "We were allied." "We were," Isabella said softly. "It seems we were always destined to save each other." They stood in the quiet lab, the weight of centuries settling around them. The attraction that had simmered beneath the surface in that New York war room, an intellectual respect, a shared fire, was now, in the quiet of this room, something else. It was no longer a partnership born of revenge. It was a connection. "You saved my family, Isabella," Alessandro said, his voice low. "You saved my legacy." "You gave me a chance to reclaim mine," she said. "I'd say we're even." "No," he said, turning to face her fully. "Not even. I am still in your debt. And I find I would like to be, for a very long time." He was standing close now. She could smell the faint scent of vetiver. "Alessandro, I'm not here for the board meeting, Isabella," he said. "I'm here for you." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing the smudge of dust from her cheekbone. "I spent my whole life speaking, and no one ever understood me. Until you. I'm a good translator," she whispered. "You're more than that," he said. And he leaned in and kissed her. It was not the kiss of a billionaire and a waitress. It was not the kiss of a boss and his director. It was a kiss between two equals, two survivors, two ancient souls who had finally found each other in the dust of history. The following spring, the main hall of the Palazzo Pitti in Florence was aglow. The Volpi Rossi Foundation was hosting its first major gala, celebrating the completed restoration of the Volpi Rossi wedding portrait and a dozen other recovered works. The room was filled with museum curators, art critics, and the old money elite of Europe. It was a triumphant return for the Rossi name. Isabella's mother, her health restored, sat at the head table, weeping tears of joy. Isabella stood at the podium. She was not wearing a pantsuit. She was wearing a stunning, deep blue gown, her hair down, her eyes sparkling. She was no longer a ghost. She was the sun. "We are told," she said, her voice echoing in the grand hall, "that legacy is something we inherit, that it is a name, a company, or a fortune passed down to us. But tonight, we are here to celebrate a different kind of legacy, one that is rebuilt, one that is earned. Legacy is not just what we are given, it is what we choose to protect. It is the art we save, the history we honor, and the truth we fight for." She looked out at the crowd, her gaze finally landing on Alessandro, who was watching her from the side, his face open, adoring. "My father," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "lost his name, but he never lost his honor. Tonight, we honor him, and we honor all those who believe that our history is worth fighting for." The room erupted in applause. Later that evening, Alessandro found her on the terrace, overlooking the Boboli Gardens. "Director Rossi," he said, a teasing smile in his voice, a magnificent speech. "Signor Volpi," she replied, leaning back against the stone. "You clean up nicely yourself." He stood beside her, looking out at the gardens. "It's different, isn't it?" "What is?" "Florence," he said. "I used to hate it here. All my stuffy relatives. It all felt so old. A museum. Now, she prompted. "Now it feels like home," he said. He took her hand. His was warm, strong. Hers fit perfectly. "You did that. You took the dust and the history, and you made it live again. You did it for the art, and you did it for me." "You were never a ruin, Alessandro," she said. "You were just trapped, like I was." He turned to her. "I have a question." "Oh, my board is meeting tomorrow, and I am officially moving the headquarters of the Volpi Foundation to Florence. Permanently." "That's wonderful news," she smiled. "That's not the question," he said. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a ring. Not yet. It was too soon, too cliché. Instead, he pulled out an old, heavy, iron key. "This," he said, "is the key to the Volpi Palazzo in Milan. It has been in my family since 1480. It's very old. It's a museum." "Alessandro, I don't want to live in a museum anymore," he said, placing the key in her palm. "I want to live in a home, and home is wherever you are." He closed her hand around the key. "I'm not asking you to be my translator, Isabella. I'm not asking you to be my advisor. I'm asking you to be my partner in the foundation, in life, in everything." Isabella looked at the key. She looked at his eyes, which were no longer cold, no longer the wolf's. They were just the eyes of a man. She stepped forward and kissed him, softly. "I have one condition," she whispered against his lips. "Anything. You have to learn to speak Florentine Italian. Your Milanese accent is still atrocious." He laughed, a real, genuine laugh that echoed over the gardens. "I think," he said, pulling her close, "I can find a good teacher." They stood there, two of the most powerful people in Europe, holding hands on a terrace, having built, from the ashes of two families, one new legacy. The story of Isabella Rossi and Alessandro Volpi is a powerful reminder that our worth is not defined by our job title, and our past does not have to be our prison. Isabella was a waitress, invisible to the world, but she held within her the knowledge and the courage to topple an empire. Alessandro was a billionaire, trapped by his own legacy, and found his greatest strength in the one person no one else bothered to see. They both learned that true power isn't about how much money you have, it's about knowing who you are. Theirs is a story of justice, of how the pen, or in this case, the perfect translation, is truly mightier than the sword. What do you think? Do you believe in second chances? Do you believe that our hidden talents are our greatest weapons? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of revenge and redemption, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own hidden power, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life dramas just like this one.